So welcome to part one of my Different Minds series, and this is episode one, a systemic problem. So in modern society it appears that we've become increasingly keen to label the difference as deficiency. Dyslexia is officially a disability in the US, recognised under law. ADHD is a disorder. Autism is a condition to be managed. This was brought into incredibly sharp focus for me last week when someone in my LinkedIn DMs told me that I was disabled. Now, don't get me wrong, he wasn't trying to insult me. He just said it as a matter of fact. In the US, where he's from, dyslexia is classified as a disability. But whatever the classification where you're from, I'm far from disabled. And well, let's just say I wasn't best pleased with him. If what I have in me is a disability, then we've misunderstood something quite fundamental about what ability is. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm dyslexic, likely with a touch of ADHD thrown in for good measure. At school, that really didn't feel like an advantage. I was scared of pens. Writing felt really heavy, slow, effortful, and frankly humiliating. By age of 16, I could count the number of books I'd read on one hand. Even in music, where I had an edge, the system caught me out. My mother was a concert pianist. I understood theory well enough, but put a stave in front of me and asked me to write, and I'd be held back after class. You don't need a formal diagnosis to feel like you're suffering when you're in that kind of environment. So I compensated. I avoided writing wherever possible, and whenever I couldn't avoid it, I overcorrected. No shorthand, perfect grammar, no mistakes, even for text messages. I did not want to be seen as less capable. Much of life has its ironies, of course, and I now write a weekly newsletter that people tell me is always too long. Now, it's worth saying that many people like me were never diagnosed. Go back 20 years, and especially before the 1980s, and neurodivergence simply wasn't understood in the way it is today. You were slow, distracted, difficult, bright but underperforming. My own school report repetitively said either could make more of his potential or disruptive in class. I was never formally diagnosed, but my younger son Huxley was. A similar underlying wiring, but in a different era with a different label. He was supported. He achieved great grades and is off to a top university to study aeronautical engineering. He's going to be a rocket scientist. So anyway, the shift in me came as I got older. Something became really, really obvious. There were things I'd always been told I was good at, and they weren't a random selection. They were all kind of connected. There was big picture thinking, and there was pattern recognition, and I was comfortable with ambiguity. I was incredibly spatially aware and had good visual reasoning. And I was resilient and adaptable. My younger son, Huxley, also dyslexic, has a level of verbal reasoning and persuasion that borders on Jedi level. And this list of superpowers that affect dyslexics are not side effects. They're part of the system that runs our minds. I'm citing dyslexia here because it's personal to me, but what I'm really describing sits within a broader category now referred to as neurodivergence. And these same traits sit at the core of my work that I do. When founders come to me, they often lack clarity. They're overwhelmed by too many moving parts, too many ideas and not enough structure. My innate skill is topsight, to see the whole system quickly and bring it into focus. What matters, what doesn't, and what needs to happen. It's not a learned trick, it's how my mind naturally works, right? And actually, both of my sons share the same thing. Now, this realistically, it's a kind of historical glitch, so let's give it a bit of historical context. Homo sapiens have been around for roughly 300,000 years. Okay? For almost all of that time, we did not read or write. Even 500 years ago, fewer than 10% of people in most societies were literate. Mass literacy, where more than half of the population could read and write, is barely 150 years old. That's 0.05% of human history, which means that for 99.95% of our existence, many of the traits we now label as neurodivergent were neither not relevant or were just advantages. We built, traded, navigated, led, fought, created, and survived without written language being central to daily life. Only recently did we build a world that runs on text, processes, standardization, and decide that fluency in that system equals capability in life. But what does this mean for business owners? Well, the realization of superpowers and the historical glitch is the reason why in business I've never been particularly interested in surface level optimization. Most businesses, they don't need more activity, they need better structure. They need awareness, the ability to actually sit and look, right? To see problems. The work I do with founders is exactly that. It's about watching and then removing the noise, tightening systems and aligning the business around what actually drives results. Once that clarity is in place, scale is less chaotic and far more intentional. This isn't really about dyslexia or ADHD or autism. It's about the system. We've built a world that rewards a narrow set of cognitive strengths, many of which are not necessarily attributes. I mean, let's see, what do we actually reward? We reward politicians for winning arguments. Does that mean that they'll be good at serving the people? We reward businesses for buying cheap and selling expensive. Does that lead to a better world to live in? And we reward business leaders for drive, even when it's at the expense of those around them. Their employees generally suffer. Does this lead to equality and happiness? Anything that sits outside of our narrow range of positives we label as a problem. For most of human history, those differences weren't problems at all. At worst, they were simply just part of the mix. And at best, they made us great hunters, builders, leaders. So it kind of begs the question, have we misunderstood people? Or do we just build systems that are too narrow to accommodate them? And with the advent now of spell check and LLMs and more AI and Audible and video blogs, actually, is literacy kind of important from now on? How long does this 150-year glitch actually last? So come back for next week in part 2 when I look at people who've used these traits to achieve remarkable things and what these superpowers actually give us. And then in part 3, I'll look at how you can really leverage the people with those superpowers and make them incredibly valuable for your businesses rather than a disrupting pain in the arse, which is what I get told a lot.